Good morning. There's a lot of interesting news to cover off today. Let's start with the announcement that President Erdogan will be meeting with President Putin in Moscow early next week. Now, this is a meeting that's been talked about for a while, mostly in context of the Black Sea grain initiative and the Erdogan's attempts to convince Putin to reinstate or restart the grain deal. The grain deal was ceased. It wasn't terminated by Russia. It was a decision made by Russia to not extend the grain deal again, as it had been extended a number of times beyond its original term. While the meeting will, I'm sure, involve talking about the grain deal, I do wonder what else will be spoken about here. Now, for Erdogan, the grain deal being restarted, the prima facie benefits to Erdogan and to Turkey will be revenue on freight and shipping fees through the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles. So anything travelling through the Black Sea has to pass through both the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, controlled by Turkey, and they do charge a tonnage rate on that. I think it's about $4.20 to $4.80 per tonne that they charge there. So there will be revenue that Turkey is failing to receive at the moment due to the cessation of this grain deal and due to the Black Sea effectively being a no-go zone. There is that. However, perhaps more importantly for Erdogan is his ability to be seen as the Putin whisperer or the deal maker. Now, this gives him significant influence in the West. If we remember that Turkey is an interesting nation in the fence upon which it sits. Its geographic location to Russia, its ability to throttle all transport, including Russian seaborne transport out of the Black Sea, means that it has some hold over Russia. Russia is a large trading partner with Turkey, and Turkey also. Being a NATO member is, in that respect, in conflict with Russia. Turkey, as we know, often has to balance between the West and Russia in terms of its military and security agreements. Turkey recently lost an F-35 deal to the US when they purchased a SAM 400 missile system. So Turkey and Erdogan going to this meeting, there will be economic factors, but I think more importantly for Erdogan, there will be this impression of or perception of power if he is able to walk away from that deal with Putin agreeing that, yes, the grain initiative will commence again. However, the big question is, why is Putin having this deal? What does Putin want out of this? Now, again, on top, what he would be looking to achieve from this would be, in terms of the grain deal, having the grain deal restarted so that Russian fertilizer and agricultural goods, including grain, can be exported through the Black Sea, through Turkey's straits. But more importantly, once it has been exported, that sanctions are lifted on Russian agricultural and fertilizer products so that they can actually be delivered to other nations. Now, the West, the European nations are the ones that are really suffering from the cessation of the grain deal. While it is often claimed that stopping the grain initiative is impacting the developing nations the most, actually the bulk of Ukrainian grain does not go to developing nations. The bulk of Ukrainian grain goes to Western nations in Western Europe. And they are suffering now from higher costs because they're not getting easy access to that Ukrainian grain. That's the real driving reason behind Erdogan going to meet with Turkey and why the West wants the grain deal re-established. Now, Putin has been very consistent about the grain deal for some time, where he has said that Russia is willing to restart the grain deal, but they require actions and proof, not just words, but actions from the West and proof that Russian agricultural products will have sanctions lifted on them so that they can be deployed and unloaded, and Russian tankers and freighters can land in foreign countries and unload, and their products can then be deployed to the nations they're intended for. So if this meeting is successful, it will be successful for Erdogan if Putin agrees to restart the deal, but that will be successful for Russia too. Russia being one of the things that in terms of Africa and what's going on there is that people have been suggesting that Putin has been causing problems to Africa because he's stopped grain getting to the nations in Africa. The African nations do not seem to see things that way. In the recent summits where delegates from the African nations attended Moscow and met with Russia there, their conversations there, they seem to be far more clear-eyed about what was really going on here and understood the true situation, and did not seem to raise the stopping of the grain deal as a major threat to any ongoing relations or development of relationships between Africa and Russia. So if the grain deal does restart, then that will only add to the positive aspects of the growing relations between African nations and Russia. What I do wonder, and I don't know what this will be, but is what else Putin will want to extract from this meeting from Erdogan. In terms of the grain deal, perhaps, but just what else lies behind this. At this stage, right now, given that Russia has just delivered its first rail-based goods to Saudi Arabia by travelling down through Azerbaijan and into Iran, and then shipping from Iranian port to Saudi Arabia. Russia now has land-based routes for supplying goods. This saves them sending freight by ship from St. Petersburg and through the Baltic. So with that happening, with growing agreement between nations in Africa, Middle Eastern nations being admitted to BRICS, Russia is probably the entity out of the grain deal that is the one requiring it the most. And remember that Erdogan is going to see Putin. So this is being driven by the West, who want to get access to the grain. I'm sure that in the background, Putin will be requiring some agreements be made if that is to happen. So that's one to keep an eye on there. Now, Josep Borrell is very unhappy. Josep Borrell is the High Representative of the European Union. His role is High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Just as some background, he is a long-term Marxist socialist from the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. He's unhappy for a number of reasons. One, the Ukrainian soldiers that the EU are assisting to train, there's not enough of them being trained. They are looking to increase their support for Ukraine by training up to 40,000 by the end of this year. We are now in September, so we've got 3 months to go. So just looking at this in one respect, that if they are looking at increasing the training of another 15 or 20,000 men by the end of the year, then that means that those men will have had at most 3 months training before going into battle. So perhaps Borrell here is meaning they will start training of 40,000 men this year. But if they're looking at concluding training, for those that have not begun, that is not a long period of time. That's barely basic training done. Not a long period of time for those men before they'll be thrust into frontline combat with a seasoned Russian force opposing them. But Borrell is also suggesting that it is only Zelensky's peace plan that is being considered. So Zelensky's peace initiative, which is not really a peace plan at all, it's a big wish, a big hope. It is it outlines that Russia must stop all of its activities in Ukraine. It must give back all land that it is claimed, including Crimea. And at that stage, Ukraine would be willing to negotiate peace with Russia. Now, this is a fantastical concept for a peace plan. If Russia were to do that, then Russia would have given back all the territory it had claimed in Ukraine, and it would have nothing to bargain with, and Ukraine would be back to where it started. So this is not going to happen. But Borrell is saying that that is the only plan that is being considered or discussed on the international stage. Now, other plans put forward by African nations, by Brazil, and by China have been pushed aside, Borrell says. So I think we can see that from the EU's perspective, they are fully aligned with the West. They are on board completely with the US. They are not looking for peace. They are looking to defeat Russia or to exploit Ukraine to try to weaken Russia. But they're not looking for peace at this stage. However, Josep Borrell is very unhappy with the Hungarian Foreign Minister, Peter Szijjártó. Hungary is a nation in Europe who is not playing ball. It's not playing along with the real NATO line or the EU narrative. Peter Szijjártó has come out stating again that they will not sign on to the EU aid package to increase funding to Ukraine until Ukraine meets some Hungarian demands. One of them is a full accounting of the 50 to 70 billion euros that have already been granted by the EU to Ukraine. Hungary would like to know what's happened with that money, where it has gone, which seems like a fair enough request. If you are donating money to a nation and they need your help, that you would be able to ask for some receipts. And also that the OTP bank, Hungarian bank, be moved off the war banking list. So at this stage, Ukraine has them on a list. And this is because the OTP bank officially recognizes the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. Ukraine Hungary and its president Viktor Orban are definitely taking a different approach. Viktor Orban met with Tucker Carlson, the ex-Fox News host, who now is I would suggest probably competing now with Joe Rogan as being the most popular personality. He has moved to the Twitter or X platform now and is doing long-form video podcasts there. And Tucker is getting some great guests on that show. He recently spoke to Viktor Orban and interviewed him. Now, just one point, just to demonstrate something that that Hungary are doing, which I think is a good idea. Hungary have a policy in place now where if a Hungarian woman, if she has a child, then she will, after the birth of that child, for any work that she performs, receive a 25% discount on her income tax. If she has 2 children, that will jump to 50% discount. If she has a 3rd child, she will then have a 75% discount on her income tax. And if she has a 4th child, she will receive a 100% discount on her income tax for life. So Hungary is looking to grow its own population. It is not on board with this need to depopulate. It is not on board with repopulating itself through immigration. It's looking to grow its own nation from within. Now, you can imagine this, that a young Hungarian woman, the incentive that she has now to assume the role of a mother, and let's say start a family when she's young, have 4 children, by the time she's in her 30s, be able to go to work completely income tax free. That's a huge incentive. Now, so Viktor Orban, when he was talking to Tucker, he stated some things. I'll just read a little bit from this. So, talking about Ukraine's victory against Moscow, he said that it is not just a misunderstanding, it is a lie. It's impossible. Adding that the Russians are far stronger and that what finally counts is boots on the ground. Orban said, "We should make a deal with the Russians on the new security architecture to provide security and sovereignty for Ukraine, but not membership in NATO." So Orban, one of the few European leaders who seems to be actually speaking truth about what should be done to resolve this conflict, how to do that, acknowledging to Russia that yes, NATO is a problem for you, acknowledging that Russia will require that Ukraine not enter NATO and remain neutral. And Orban's right in this. Russia is enormous. The idea that Ukraine is going to win against Russia using its current model is ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. Russia has adopted a war footing. The nation is active. Its unemployment is down. They're having problems, but a problem in a good way, of a labour shortage. They don't have enough people to do all of the work that Russia wants to do at the moment, because people are already working 2 jobs or working 12-hour shifts. Factories in Russia are being built and they are working and operating 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They are producing for the war at rates and levels unseen since World War II. Russia is growing its war production in that size, and the whole of Russia is committed to this. In terms of their mobilization and their planning, we're getting indications and hints that Russia is preparing, if need be, to go to war with NATO, with all of NATO. And so it's already doing that now. The West isn't doing this. There are no NATO nations that are under existential threat like Russia perceives itself to be under an existential threat at the moment. Germany doesn't see that this way. Romania doesn't. Poland doesn't see itself that way. The UK and the United States certainly do not see themselves under any sort of existential threat from Russia. And for those reasons, their governments and their industries have not moved to a war footing. So every day that NATO remains operating as it is, Russia is growing stronger and stronger and stronger as it is on this war footing. And just some simple numbers here. Ukraine's population has dropped down to somewhere like 25 million. They've lost 11 or 12 million people due to this war. A lot of those people won't come back. They won't come back because for some of them, the areas that they lived in will now be Russian controlled when this conflict ends. For some of them, they won't come back because where they live will have been destroyed. They'll have no family or friends there anymore. For some of them, they won't come back because they will have moved to other European nations and will have established roots there. They will have met partners, they will have had children, they will be living and working in those countries, and they will remain there. So the population of Ukraine now down to, let's say, 25 million. The population of Russia is 140 million. And people like to say, oh, look, Poland might get into this fight, and then it'll be it for Russia. Poland has 40 million people. Russia has 140 million people. We've seen what Russia has been able to sustain and do in Ukraine, and That was after Russia started with a completely different strategy, initially going in there, trying not to cause too much trouble, just trying to threaten Kiev to negotiate, which almost happened in March and April of 2022. Had it not been for Boris Johnson's intervention, perhaps this whole conflict would have been avoided. Anyhow, it's a different topic. So Russia is slowly grinding up Ukraine. If Poland gets into the fight, then why would Poland find things any different? What is it that's about Poland that is so special that if they get into there, suddenly Russia will capitulate? Because now a country of 40 million, Poland, who have to come and reach the Russians in the same locations, who have to deal with the same Russian aircraft and air defense systems, who have to deal with the same overmatch in terms of Russian artillery and shell production. Poland won't make the big difference. Germany's got 84 million people. Now, Germany, if they got into the fight, yes, that would be a big problem for Russia, but not an insurmountable one. Even if you had Poland and Germany and Ukraine all fighting together, then you're now at about parity in terms of population base. So if you wanted to mobilize troops, you could keep pace with Russia. Although, again, for Poland and Germany, they wouldn't be under that existential threat. Germany is miles away from Ukraine. It would be tougher to mobilize there. Yeah, but Russia is under existential threat. It will mobilize from all across Russia. So Russia is not going to lose to Ukraine. It is going to continue to grind westward until it reaches its objectives, its points, it gets to the Dnieper River, it takes Odessa, whatever it is that it wants. And at that stage, when it's comfortable where it has reached, it will then look to negotiate with what remains of Ukraine, what remains of the Ukrainian government. It will look to remove Zelensky and the current government and install a government there that will quite simply agree to never trying to join NATO and to being, if not friendly to Russia, at least being neutral in its dealings between Russia and the West. So Tucker Carlson, just going back to Tucker, he was interviewed then by Adam Carolla, and I'll just read through a couple of questions here that Adam asked Tucker and Tucker's response. So this is important because Tucker Carlson was the most popular presenter on Fox News, and then after leaving Fox, after being sacked by Fox, he's only become more popular. So, like I say, him and Joe Rogan are the people that on a daily basis more people in America listen to than anyone else. So if Tucker Carlson is saying things, whether you agree with it or not, this is what people are hearing and people are starting to think and people will be agreeing with in America. So Adam Carolla says, what do you think the future holds? Are they going to let Trump be president? And Tucker Carlson says, of course, I mean, look, they protested him, they call him names. He won anyway. They impeached him twice on ridiculous pretenses. They fabricated a lot of what happened on January 6th in order to impeach him. It didn't work. He came back. And then they indicted him. It didn't work. He became more popular. Then they indicted him 3 more times. And every single time his popularity rose. If you begin with criticism, then you go to protest, then you go to impeachment, now you go to indictment, and none of them work. What's next? Graph it out, man. We're speeding towards assassination, obviously. No one will say that, but I don't know how you can't reach that conclusion. Do you know what I mean? They have decided, this is permanent Washington, and both parties have decided that there's something about Trump that's so threatening to them, they just can't have it. Again, if this were happening in Moldova, the State Department would issue an all-hands-on-deck order to let the world know this is not a legitimate government. And yet, our government is doing it. It's really hard to overstate how bad this is. And I don't know where it is going, but there is a collision that is clearly imminent. So, and then he goes on to say, by the way, the president is senile in a way that is impossible to deny. Here he's talking about the current president, President Biden. Biden is not running the government. I don't know, man. I've never been as worried about anything as I am about where this is going. So this is huge for Tucker Carlson to be saying this. Now, Viktor Orban also in his interview with Tucker, his main statement was that bring back Trump. You need to reinstate Trump to save the West. And so Orban here isn't concerned with minor things about Trump like this and that and blah blah blah. No, he's suggesting that Trump is far more conservative in many ways, and that would look to stop the conflict in Ukraine and would look to address much of the woke left, postmodernist, neo-Marxist leanings of the US at the moment. Tucker is going to have a huge influence here, and people are going to get on board with Trump, I think, like never before. And there will be a huge fight, as he was saying here, as he's alluding, he's getting to the point where he feels there may even be an assassination attempt because the Democrats just will not let Trump win. And unfortunately for Trump, it's not just the Democrats. It's also the Republicans. The Republicans themselves are afraid of Trump. Alexander Mercouris yesterday, speaking with Alex Christoforou on the Duran, had great commentary about this and was suggesting that this was why the impeachment call for Biden, when there now appears to be sufficient information to justify an impeachment inquiry being established, the reason that McCarthy and Mitch McConnell aren't jumping on this is because they are afraid that if Biden is impeached, then this will make this easier for Trump to assume the presidency, and they will then lose control of the Republican Party because Trump will be in charge. And many feel that Trump will come through with a scythe this time, and with the experience of what happened in his first presidency, and will look to really clear out a lot of dead wood there. Let's see. Also, just on Mitch McConnell, I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago where he had some sort of brain or cerebral event, perhaps a stroke on camera, where he just froze, looked like a robot winding down, and just stared blankly until he was escorted away. People, they suggested no more questions, and he was sort of walked away. After that, later that day, he came out of his office, attempted to make a joke about what had happened, and then suffered another event. Again, just began to stare off into the middle distance. That nothing seemed to happen for a couple of weeks. Yesterday, he was being interviewed again. This time, his handlers weren't so onto it, and he was asked a question. He then asked, "Sorry, what are you asking me about?" And then was just unable to speak for about a minute and just froze and stood there. His handlers came over and suggested, "Oh, did you hear the question?" "Yes," he said. Ask the reporters, "Oh, please speak up clearly so that he can hear you," instead of just taking him away. But Mitch McConnell is suffering strokes or something. He's not mentally fit to be holding the role that he holds. This is clearly obvious. Biden's much the same. And this is a big part of the reason of why, one of the many reasons of why I think a lot of people will vote to put Trump back in, if not just for the pure entertainment value of Trump coming back. Okay, anyhow, let's move on to a bit of a battle update now that we've got that out of the way. Estonia. So, look, I'll get the map up here on the screen so we can just talk through some of this as we go. Now, Estonia. We spoke about Estonia yesterday, the day before yesterday, due to the drone attacks on the Pskov airbase up here in northwestern Russia. Estonia is just near here. Now, there was some speculation that the drone attacks may have been launched from Estonia. What I'm seeing so far is that is not the case. However, possibly drones were launched from the Baltic Sea just north of Estonia. And that may have been how they were able to get to the Pskov airbase without being noticed. Again, still to be confirmed, but talks now is that the drones involved were the Beaver drones, which have a range of 800 kilometres. So these drones, if these were the ones involved, these certainly could have reached from Ukraine to this airbase, and not the SIPAC Australian cardboard drones as had first been speculated yesterday. Interestingly, though, while we're just on Estonia, the Minister of Defence of Estonia, Hanno Pevkura, has mentioned that there are difficulties in getting ammunition supplies to Ukraine from the EU, and they are moving slowly. Of the promised million shells, only a quarter of those, or just under a quarter, only 226,000 shells have been delivered so far. According to Pevkura, Ukraine uses about 6,000 rounds of shells per day, while Russia from 60 to 70,000 on peak days. Now, this may or may not be an inflation by Estonia to try to draw attention to the mismatch in shells and to try to speed up the supply of shells, or it may be accurate. There has long been known that Russia has not only more artillery pieces, but no problems with supplying those pieces. If we take the lower number here, if this is true, then on peak days, they are talking about a 10-to-1 ratio in Russia's favour in terms of the number of shells thrown at their opponent. This is something which has been understood for months and months and months, and yet something which I find many people on the Ukrainian supporting channels just seem to fail to recognise when they claim that Ukraine is being successful and they are capturing ground. We know the amount of ground they're capturing is very small, that clearly there are heavy losses here. This is one of those pure mathematical indicators that to me indicates that the Ukrainians are suffering far more losses than the Russians. Not only do we get daily video updates of both sides scoring hits with artillery, but if we have Russia with the capability of launching 10 times as many shells against its opponent, then clearly, logically, Ukraine has to be suffering far more losses than Russia does. Okay, reconnaissance activity in the north and the south. So up near Kaliningrad is here, is this area here. It's separated by I'll just zoom in a little bit. It's separated by the Suwalki Gap, which is this little border area here between Poland and Lithuania. Kaliningrad, an E-8C J-Stars, a combat control and target designation aircraft, was spotted in the Kaliningrad direction. It is equipped with an active phased array radar, an AN/APY-7, which is likely to be used for reconnaissance of a position in the area of the bases of the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Navy. So, some concerns today from the Russians that reconnaissance and targeting aircraft flying around the Kaliningrad area here. Now, Kaliningrad is an oblast of Russia, even though it is geographically separated from Russia itself. In some of the war games scenarios that get planned out, where if Poland gets into the fight and if Belarus gets into the fight, where ultimately Belarus and Russia might look to enforce a corridor across the Suwalki Gap here and effectively join Kaliningrad to Belarus, but that's a long way down the track if we ever get there. However, also nearby, approximately 30 kilometres from Kaliningrad, a Swedish Gulfstream 4 S-10-2B Korpen electronic intelligence aircraft has been reported flying around. And later on in this report, I'll get down to the Black Sea, reports of American reconnaissance drones in the Black Sea operating again. Now, I just want to quickly ask a question here, and then we'll get into the rest of the update. But Poltava. So Poltava is here in central Ukraine. We have Kiev here. Kiev is about, what's that? It's about 300 kilometers to the northwest of Poltava. And Poltava is just above Dnipro. It's 120 kilometers north of Dnipro. Now, in the last week, there have been multiple reports of missile and drone strikes on Poltava. And now, prior to that, I don't recall that happening. This is interesting looking at its position. We can see where the front line activity is all around here. We have this line of recent evacuations on the northern Kharkiv region, Sumy up here and Chernihiv. Now, both Sumy and Chernihiv have undergone over the last couple of months strikes. If you remember a while ago, I started to mention these two because, again, it was becoming interesting why they were starting to be hit. Now Poltava is. So this, to me, gives me the impression that Russia is planning to push westward. And for some reason, they are looking at threatening these areas here. Now, the Dnieper River runs down this line here. So you can imagine that if we go back to a week ago where I was reporting on what Weeb Union, Weeb Union is a military analyst, a really good military analyst on YouTube. Check out Weeb Union if you haven't already. Weeb's reports that he had uncovered some information where he believed what a Russian plan might be here is to push from the west, from this Kupiansk to Krasny Liman line, increase pressure here to draw up Ukrainian brigades from the south, to draw them up from Zaporozhye and Donetsk into this area, then to push across from Belgorod and Sumy towards Poltava from the east, push up from the Zaporozhye region through Dnipro or skirting Dnipro up towards Poltava, and then have Wagner forces come in with Russian forces and push down towards Chernihiv here. So put pressure because Kiev would be getting closer to the action, fighting on Chernihiv towards Kiev, draw Ukrainian forces here, draw Ukrainian forces up here, and then push up from Zaporozhye and push in from Sumy above Kharkiv, avoiding Kharkiv, but centering on Poltava here and creating a massive cauldron around all of these Ukrainian forces in this area. Getting up troops coming up from the south to Poltava and then splitting in two, some joining in this cauldron and some then rolling up the Dnieper River towards Kiev, putting pressure on Kiev. So this, look, if Weeb is suggesting this could happen, then he does good analysis and thinks things out. So it's possible. And it's interesting that just after his report on that being a possible plan of attack, we're now seeing this softening up, if you will, or preliminary strikes on Poltava. The one last night was on, I believe, some sort of a grain handling depot, which was reportedly storing munitions, and that's why it had been struck. Okay, I'm just going to move on now to the Ministry of Defense reports, which I talk through most days. This is the Russian Ministry of Defense. They provide daily updating in a consistent format. The Ukrainian, Ministry of Defense does not provide the same level of reporting. In the Kupiansk region, getting up near Kharkiv, the Zapad group of forces have been operating over the past 24 hours, 5 counterattacks by assault detachments of the armed forces of Ukraine's 68th Jaeger Brigade. The 32nd and 43rd Mechanized Brigades have been repelled near Sergivka and Novogorovka. The enemy, in this case this is Ukraine, has lost up to 50 Ukrainian troops, 2 motor vehicles, 1 Polish-made Krab self-propelled howitzer, as well as 2 D-20 howitzers. I do wonder how many Krabs were given to Ukraine, how many they started with, because we're seeing 1 or 2 of these reportedly destroyed on a daily basis. Just a note, though, for those of you who may be new to the channel, In terms of the Ministry of Defence reporting, the numbers given for Ukrainian troop losses are killed and wounded in an area, and these are determined by the Ministry of Defence, reportedly, by their ability to be able to intercept Ukrainian communications being reported back to their command centres on their losses. So the Russians don't estimate these numbers based on bodies on the ground or reports from the Russian soldiers. These are based upon intercepted communiques of the Ukrainians. Also, an ammunition depot of the 66th Mechanized Brigade was destroyed close to Petrovsky in the Lugansk People's Republic area. In the Krasny Liman, so this is moving south down this line, in the Krasny Liman area, this is where the centre group of forces operate. They have been operating again with army aviation, their artillery and the heavy flamethrower systems. They have repelled 2 attacks of assault detachments of the 67th Mechanised Brigade close to Chervonaya Dvorova. Reportedly, the Ukrainian losses in terms of servicemen are 55 troops, 3 armoured fighting vehicles, as well as an M-Star-B and D-30 howitzer. Moving then down to the Donetsk area. So Donetsk area here, Bakhmut in this area, and Donetsk city here. In the Donetsk direction where the Yug group of forces are operating, they have repelled 6 attacks of assault detachments from the armed forces of Ukraine near Bogdanovka, Andriivka, Mayorsk and Avdiivka. Avdiivka is just north of Donetsk and is the area where shelling of Donetsk city has occurred since about 2014. This is an area which seems to have evolved into a small cauldron. Again, it's a very important location for the Ukrainians, for their ability to shell Donetsk city from there. And the Russians have held fire control over the one remaining supply road into Avdiivka for a number of weeks now and have not closed that off. And it does seem as though they are using the same methods or strategy that they used in Bakhmut, where they would allow the Ukrainians to reinforce and resupply so that they could then attrit those resources within that cauldron area. In Donetsk direction, up to 365, that's 365 Ukrainian troops are reported to have been killed or wounded in Donetsk fighting. So this is all the way through from here, from Kramatorsk through Bakhmut, then Kleshayevka to Andivka, Donetsk, and Volodya. Sort of this area through here is where this fighting is occurring and these losses are reported. Now, the fighting over the last 2 days has stepped up in this area. Yesterday, the reporting were losses for the Ukrainians were 380 troops. Today, 365. Now, look, I know that many of you may say, look, this is Russian Ministry of Defense reporting. These numbers can't be trusted. I completely accept and understand that. I'm not suggesting they are unbiased or that they are not inflated, but they are at least consistent daily. And as I say, many of the reports are backed up by video evidence afterwards. What I'm suggesting here, while you may not believe the exact numbers, we may not trust that it was 365 and 380 yesterday, they do seem to give an indication of what's going on. And in this area, for the last couple of days, for whatever reason, it does appear as though these numbers have been increasing significantly. You know, we've been seeing numbers of 200 and 240, which were high. Now 360 and 380. Something is going on in this Donetsk region, if these numbers are correct, which is causing the Ukrainians to lose larger and larger numbers of men on a daily basis. Now, what this might be exactly, if it's a change in tactic, perhaps by the Ukrainians, if it is recent Russian strikes on anti-artillery radar units of the Ukrainians, which is now enabling the Russians to win the artillery duels, which is then allowing the Russians to focus artillery on less on Ukrainian artillery batteries, but instead on Ukrainian positions. If it is now the Russians beginning to use cluster munitions, and more of these TOS thermobaric flamethrower systems. Something is going on there, which is causing the Ukrainians to suffer very heavy losses in terms of men. Yesterday in the Donetsk region, 365 Ukrainian troops reported lost, 3 US-made Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, 2 armoured personnel carriers, 32 motor vehicles, 1 Polish-made Krab self-propelled artillery howitzer, as well as a D-20 and D-30 howitzers have been neutralised. An ammunition depot of the 54th Mechanised Brigade was destroyed close to Veseloy. 1 Ukrainian S-200 surface-to-air missile system has been neutralised near Slavyansk, and a command post and military field training camp of the 72nd Mechanised Brigade were destroyed close to Vuhledar, which is just in this area here. In the southern Donetsk region, so here we are talking really around this area here, Yorozhne and Staromayorsk in this area here, which is where we've talked in the past. This is where the Ukrainians from Pryutny here to Novodonetsk, from Pryutny here to the west of the Veremke Ledge, and then from Novodonetsk here to the east of the Veremsky Ledge. In this area, the Ukrainians have walked down the Veremsky Ledge, following the river and road down here, down to from the Skuchny down to Staromayorsk and Yorozhny, and are looking to push themselves further south. However, they are needing to be aware of the fact that they are, if they do proceed much further south, they're getting themselves into a real wedge and run the risk of the Russians pushing and closing that off upon them. So they have in this area somewhat paused in the last couple of days, which appears to be an attempt to reinforce, to allow them to try to push this wedge westward towards Pryutny and broaden this area, and push east towards Novodonetsk here again to broaden this, and so as to remove the threat of the Russians being able to encirculate their spearhead group here. So, but in this South Donetsk region, this is where units of the Vostok group operate. They have delivered strikes at manpower and hardware clusters near Staromayorsk and Yorozhny. Up to 100 Ukrainian troops, 4 motor vehicles, 2 M-Star-B howitzers, as well as 1 US-made M119 howitzer have been destroyed during the day. 2 ammunition depots are reported as of the 72nd Mechanised Brigade have also been destroyed, being close to Vuhledar, which is just back here to the east slightly around this area. Now, moving to the Zaporozhye area. So in Zaporozhye here, the main fighting is around Robotne and Novoprokopivka, and with the Ukrainians attempting to make their way to Tokmak. We've talked about this a lot in the last few days, but in this area, again, Russian army aviation, artillery and heavy flamethrower systems have repelled 5 attacks by the 82nd Air Assault Brigade close to Verbova. Now, Verbova is just here to the east of Robotne. It is 9 kilometers to the east of Robotne. The fighting here has been very heavy. There is video coming out showing Robotny and showing heavy losses for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are pushing to the east and south of Robotny, looking to cut this road here and to then be able to break Russian supply into Novoprokopivka and Robotny. They are looking at pushing into Verbova here, and there is a contested line just in front of Verbova here, with perhaps some reports of Ukrainians reaching the very outskirts and then the Russians pushing them back out. However, I don't have a topographical map here, Basically, this area around here, which the Russians hold, is higher ground, and there are a couple of hills or hillocks in this area here. The Ukrainians appear to have paused on their push, perhaps into Verbova and Novopropakivka, and are focusing on trying to gain some of the higher grounded areas in here to be able to then establish some artillery and fire control over those areas. And this sort of somewhat this pause is reflected in the reported numbers here, with up to only 85 Ukrainian troops reported as being lost in the last 24 hours, 2 motor vehicles and 1 M777 howitzer. 1 Czech-made Vampire MLRS combat vehicle, as well as 3 D-30 howitzers have been destroyed. Also, an ammunition depot of the 47th Mechanized Brigade was destroyed close to Orikov. So now Orikov is just, wrong way, sorry, just going to zoom back out, is just north here. Orikov is here. In the Kherson region, so moving down the Dnieper River, down towards the south to Kherson here. In Kherson, this is Kherson City. Here's the Antonovsky Bridge. Here's Kazachii Lahiri just here. In this area, quiet. We've had a lull in fighting here. Up to 20 Ukrainian troops reported lost, 2 motor vehicles, as well as 2 D-30 howitzers. An ammunition depot of the 121st Territorial Defence Brigade has been wiped out close to the Mikhailovka area. Now, for the last couple of days, the reported numbers of Ukrainian losses have been around the 15 to 20 mark in this area. So it does seem as though there is a slowing at this stage around Kherson. In the Black Sea, just in the last 48 hours, Ministry of Defence reports that the Black Sea Fleet's naval aviation destroyed 4 high-speed military boats, which were attempting to land up to 50 servicemen of the Ukrainian Special Forces, and that last night an American RQ-4 Global Hawk drone with the call sign Forte 11 has been operating in the southern area of the Black Sea, which is down around here. Now, quite frequently we get reports of Reapers, Global Hawks flying around this area. That's often occurred prior to drone strike activity, either around the Kerch Strait and the Kerch Bridge here, or on the SIG, that tanker, and on the Olengorsky Gornyak, the Russian military ship that was attacked. There were reports of assistance from American, US reconnaissance drones in those attacks. So, look, that's the battle update for today. I will be back either later today or tomorrow with another report. I hope you're enjoying these. If you are and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.